Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today is a great day. It's the first time the sun has shone in my neck of the woods in about a month. I shouldn't say a month, about a week. We've been having rain every single day, and today had a lot of fog. There's a lot of moisture. Probably get some more rain, but so far so good. We got a great show for you today. We're going to start out with an article about President Trump, and I know this will shock you. He is standing with the police. Yes, President Trump is standing along with the men and women in that thin blue line that has been stretched pretty thin as of late for sure. So we're going to talk about his stance on the police. Then we're going to talk about Congress. Congress is pushing a bill, the Democrats, I should say, in Congress are pushing a bill which will literally, if passed in its current form, will destroy every police department in the United States of America, will literally obliterate them, and I kid you not, and I'll explain in detail, especially one particular part of it that will absolutely destroy police officers or police offices nationwide. I'll explain that in just a moment. And then happy days, baby. Happy days are here again. Trump has announced, or his campaign has stated, that they expect to be doing full-blown Trump rallies within a couple of weeks. And we're going to talk about the reality of that, the implications of it, and the celebration that me and Billy Bob here are having today. When I told him the news, and if you're wondering who Billy Bob is, he's my psychic sidekick. Yeah, I'm a fish whisperer. Got a Twitter handle, by the way. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. But man, his tail was wagging today, or flopping, I guess, when I told him that the Trump rallies are back, baby, or they soon will be. But we start with a New York Times article about President Trump standing with the police. Here's the title: Trump rebuffs protests over systematic racism and calls police great people. What a tragedy. You know, Trump calls police officers great people. President Trump on Monday flatly denied that systematic problems existed in American police departments, declaring that as many as 99.9% of the nation's officers are great people, as he rebuffed mass street protests denouncing racist behavior in law enforcement. Well, first of all, I guess that 99.9 is better than Biden's, 10 to 15% of Americans are just bad. They're just bad. I don't know if that's you. I guess I am, man. I was a deplorable. Then I became a dreg when Biden announced that some of us were dreg societies. And now I guess I'm just bad. I'm just bad, man. Chicks dig the bad dudes, though, right? Ladies love outlaws like babies love stray dogs. Waylon Jennings there, my friend. But let me just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, feelings are not facts. You may hear that from time to time. You can have whatever feeling you want. You just can't always have your facts. And the fact is that racism has gotten much better in America. Does it mean it doesn't still exist? Of course not. There's going to be racism from all sides, and black people may suffer the most. I'm not disputing that, for some time to come, if ever, because you cannot legislate what is in a man's heart or a person's heart. You can't do it. You can't do that. Not yet, anyway. But I would maintain that when it comes to systematic racism, in other words, to me, codified into law, that we've done an excellent job at that and basically obliterated racism. Now, does that mean that everything is fair and equal? Probably not. But there's only so much you can do, because human beings fall short of the glory. The glory of God, that is. There's a book somewhere out there that maybe, I think it might have been that one that President Trump was holding up at that photo op, right? Maybe we ought to check that out, because somewhere in there, it says something about all of us falling short of the glory. So to say that human beings are going to get to the point that there is no racism is a great thing to strive for. but probably not reality. But the feelings are not facts. The facts are that the president's basic numbers are right about this. That if you look at the FBI statistics, they show that violence of white cops against black males is down significantly over the last couple of decades. Now, does that excuse what happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when Mr. Floyd was killed by that police officer? No one really disputes that. No, it doesn't. It doesn't change that fact whatsoever. And I am not denying that that type of activity exists. Obviously, it does. But do we need to totally change policing in America or do away with it? And I'm going to talk more about that as the show unfolds. Does that mean that we have to do that? I'm not certain of that. Mr. Trump, who has adopted an uncompromising law and order. I love this paragraph. No opinionated stuff here, right? Mr. Trump, who has adopted an uncompromising law and order posture and scorned demonstrators that have broken out in cities nationwide. That, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call out. That is a lie. President Trump has not scorned protesters. He has defended protesters. Part of his law and order stance is so you can have mostly peaceful protests. He's trying to defend the protesters. What President Trump has scorned are the lawless, the people who have taken advantage of peaceful protests and looted, pillaged, burned, desecrated our monuments and everything. That is what he has scorned and had harsh language for. The actual protesters, he has not. So I'm going to call that out every time because it is just a lie. And the media just keeps putting it out there. But according to this, he says that President Trump has surrounded himself yesterday, and he did, with law enforcement officials at the White House and tried to link liberals' calls to defund the police to his Democratic opponent, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., even though Mr. Biden came out earlier defunding the police. Well, one of his staffers said that. I don't know that Biden has actually said that. But the question, and you'll understand this in a bit more in our second story, but does Biden support what the Democrats in Congress are doing that right now? Because what they're doing is going to, if it passes in its current form, which I don't expect it to, but if it did, then there would be no police force to defund. And I'll expand on that shortly. But Mr. Trump said there won't be defunding. There won't be dismantling of our police. There's not going to be any disbanding of our police. And I hope that he's right about that. And you may say, well, absolutely he's right about that. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure at all. Think about this, and I'm not necessarily taking a position on it. I'm just pointing out some facts, political facts, and you can determine for yourself. But I don't think you can dispute that there was a time when some of these things I'm about to list would have been unthinkable, but yet they are law in some parts of this country right now, and in some cases all over the country. How about gay marriage? A decade ago, you would have never thought that there would be gay marriage codified into law, and the Supreme Court, I believe, has ruled on this now, and it is nationwide. In fact, if you go back and look at it, every place that gay marriage was on the ballot was defeated by the people, but the courts pushed it through, which is typical of Democrats. I'm not necessarily taking a position. I'm just saying there was a time when you said that is not going to happen, yet it is law. How about abortion after the baby is actually born? I mean, as little as a year ago, you'd have probably said, no, they cannot take it that far, that once a baby's actually breathing outside of the womb, that baby can then be aborted. But it is the law now in the city or in the state of New York. And even in Virginia, at least they tried to pass it, right? How about churches being burned and locked down? How about the fact that you can't go into some churches right now? Now they're beginning to open up nationwide, but for the last 2 or 3 months, you can't legally, pretty much anywhere in the country, go in a church and worship. Now, if I'd have told you a year ago that a year from now we're going to have churches locked up and where people can't physically go into their churches, you would have said there's no way in the world. Yet we had it. So I hope the president is right about disbanding and defunding and all that of the police. But I wouldn't bet that there isn't going to be some of that around the country in spite of what the president says. And that's not a criticism of his. I'm just telling you how the political situation in this country is. While Trump advisors had hoped to tie Mr. Biden together with the protesters to try to hurt him with moderate and independent voters, Mr. Biden campaign undercut the tactic by announcing that he does not believe police should be defunded, while noting that he supports the urgent need for reform. So he supports urgent need for reform. Let me just ask, I keep asking this question. As of yet, I have not had a response to this question. And I'm going to keep asking it, and I'd love to get a response to it. So if you're, whatever Facebook network you're on, Citizens for Trump, good morning, howdy, how are you? America's Voice News. We're going to talk more about them a little bit later on. But wherever you're listening from, go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, of course, like it and share it with others. Our YouTube channel now, John Martin Talks, spell it all out. In any place you're watching us, if you have the ability to comment or ask a question or answer, in this case, a question, I will get back to you as soon as possible. But my questions is out there. And this is not a criticism of Mr. Floyd and not a justification for the killing, which was atrocious by that police officer and the others onlooking in Minneapolis. But my question is this: what law that is currently not on the books could be passed? What training, what policy could be implemented that would have prevented what happened to Mr. Floyd? Because I don't see one out there. And the reason I say that is because there's already everything that was done to that guy was pretty much illegal now. And therefore, those guys have been charged. And the man in the case has been charged, what, second-degree murder, I believe now, that the police officer. So what more could have been done? What policy change could you have? I suppose if you didn't have police at all, that might be one. But if you're going to have police officers, and my point being that what that person did was evil, and what that police officer has in his heart is obviously pretty dark. And there's no legislation in the world, I wish there was, that can change that, but there's just not. So I'm concerned that we're reactionary to this thing, and it is not going to have the consequences that these people want. In fact, I think more violence will come from this in the long run if they get their way. The back and forth highlighted how drastically the campaign has changed in 2 weeks, and that is true, since George Floyd died, who I believe he's going to be buried today in Houston. God rest his soul, and prayers to the families and all that. And I'm glad that he is being laid to rest, I guess, by his mother in Houston today, I think. Since George Floyd died after a white police officer kneeled on his neck in Minneapolis. Terrible. Mr. Biden has spent much of that time expressing solidarity with protesters against racial injustice, and on Monday traveled to Houston to meet with Mr. Floyd's family in advance of Tuesday's funeral. Well, and I know they're not going to ask this, but wouldn't a good question for Mr. Biden be, how did we get here? I mean, what have you done in the last 50 years, essentially, that you've been in Washington, D.C.? What did you not do that could have prevented this? And what are you going to do now that will actually prevent this from happening? Because if Biden had a solution, why has he waited so long? If Biden is the answer, I'm not even sure what the question is. But anyway, we'll move on. Mr. Trump has sought to appeal to his hardcore base. I guess that's that 15% of you that are just bad. They're just bad folks. You're just bad. But Mr. Trump has sought to appeal to his hardcore base with threats to use force in the streets and other harsh language to try to show he has no tolerance for disorder. So what is the opposite of that? Here's the campaign for disorder. We tolerate disorder. I mean, what is the ridiculous of that? What President Trump has really exposed, ladies and gentlemen, is the media's bias. I mean, they are literally running infomercials for Joe Biden now. I mean, they don't even cover President Trump on like MSNBC and CNN when he's delivering remarks from the Rose Garden But Biden, they'll put him on and basically put on a 10-minute video that he produces. It's crazy. And as far as, and the other thing he's exposed is just how far left the leadership of the Democratic Party has gone and is still willing to go, because the Democratic Party has now come out and essentially said they are for destroying every police department. And I'm not talking about defunding. I'll make this very clear in just a moment. Hang in there, stay tuned, share it with others so they can hear it. But the Democratic Party now has put forward a platform that, if passed, will destroy every police department in the United States literally overnight. And I'll explain in a moment. But it says harsh language to try to show that he has no tolerance for disorder. The harsh language President Trump has had has been for the disorder, for the fact that people are rioting in the streets. When you hear this term that the left is now, I guess they've polled with a group focused it or something, a mostly peaceful protest. What exactly does that mean? Mostly peaceful protest? Because there's been over 17 people, including police officers, as far as of yesterday, I think, killed in various forms or fashion during these mostly peaceful protests. So if one of your loved ones was one of the people that was killed in this, and many of them are black, by the way, would you feel that that protest was mostly peaceful? It's kind of like asking Ms. Lincoln, other than, that one little incident, how'd you like the play? It was mostly peaceful. I mean, it's just crazy, man. Mr. Trump called the family of Mr. Floyd last month, but he gets no credit for that. But he has not met with protest leaders or major African-American political figures since the demonstration erupted. That's really not true. But he hasn't met with people like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. That's what they're talking about. Major political figure like Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton, who went to the Obama White House, I'm not saying he met with President Obama every time, but something like 85 documented times during Obama's term in office. So why didn't they solve the problem, man? Let me just tell you, Jesse Jackson, not Jesse, but Al Sharpton, giving the eulogy at Mr. Floyd's funeral is just terrible. You lose a lot of people when you put Al Sharpton out there. We missed a golden opportunity with Mr. Floyd's death, and I'm not saying, I'm not trying to besmirch that in any way. But when you put Al Sharpton out there, man, you talk about a guy who has no credibility, and we'll talk more about him in just a moment. White House officials have explored the possibility of a trip by Mr. Trump or Vice President Pence to Minnesota, but so far have backed off the idea, recognizing that neither would be welcome by many there. That's probably true right now. Minneapolis, if you've been watching it, has become totally lawless. Completely lawless. I don't know if you saw this video, and of course they didn't harm the dude, and not physically, but the mayor of Minneapolis, a young guy, he looks like a deer in the headlight. He looks like he just graduated high school. I'm just being honest with you. And he went to try to address this defunding of the police to a crowd of protesters, and they literally laughed, booed, chanted him, and violently, and some, as far as verbally, pushed him out, told him in his own city that he is persona non grata, and essentially told him that they're going to work to defeat him, and he was trying to address the crowd. Now, look at this picture. I'm going to show this video here. We're only going to show about a minute of a 3 or 4 minute video, but check it out and see what you think. That's good enough. I think you get the general idea. Now, talk about things you didn't think you would see. Did you really think you would literally see a scene from Game of Thrones, some of you Game of Thrones fans out there, in the streets of a major American city? Basically, that's straight out of Game of Thrones. The only difference was the young man wasn't naked, so to speak. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. You can check it out. But shame. He was there. He wasn't allowed to speak in his own city. Think about that. You're the mayor of the city, and you're not even allowed to speak and shamed off of a public street, basically run out of town, so to speak, and you're wanting the president to go there to show some kind of leadership. I'll be willing to bet you Joe Biden won't go there no matter what. But Trump said about police, he said, our police have been letting us live in peace, and we want to make sure that we don't have any bad actors, which is definitely what that dude did on Mr. Floyd's neck in there. And sometimes we'll see some horrible things like we witnessed recently. But I say 99.9, let's go with 99% of them, great people, and they've done jobs that are record setting. Does anybody really dispute that? Does anybody really believe that that there's higher than 1% of the police officers in this country that are really, as quote, bad apples, so to speak? I mean, I've told you this before, but if I say it, it bears repeating. One of the things my dad used to say is that there's no evidence that there's a higher percentage of crooked cops than there are crooked barbers. The problem, and he's absolutely right about this, God rest his soul, is that the harm they can do. You know, a crooked barber give you a bad haircut. A crooked cop can do exactly what we saw happen in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm still not convinced that there's any training out there, any particular program. Now, I'm all for doing away with chokeholds and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm down with most of that. But I don't know that there's any policy or procedure that would have prevented what that gentleman did. He was a bad seed, plain and simple. Recent polls indicate that Mr. Trump is out of step with many Americans on the protests, some of which have unfolded in Republican-leaning states that voted for him in 2016. So how is he out of step with them? I mean, is he out of step? He's come out and said that he's for peaceful protest. He's off. The police actually are to help with peaceful protests. Now, I'm not excusing every single thing. Let's take, for instance, I haven't really commented on this, but what happened up in Buffalo, where you had the guy that was like 70, 75, white, confront the police, and he got shoved down, tripped and fell and hit his head, and is in the hospital. I think he's still in there as far as I know. I'm not excusing that in any way, shape, or form. They should have handled that totally differently. But I can tell you, that would never happen to me. Never. Not unless I got senile like Joe Biden, maybe. Because even in my rough and tumble days when I have eluded police officers, yes, yours truly has eluded. There's one out there that's in Mississippi. Ryan, how you doing, man? You know, he knows who he is. He watches the show. He's a retired police officer. But he actually chased me back in the day, you know, because I was smoking pot and doing what a lot of little teenage ruffians do. They wasn't doing no B&E and none of that kind of stuff. Not excuse. Anyway, I digress. What I'm saying is, even in my craziest times, I would never, when I saw police officers with their batons out like this, shields over, would I walk directly at them and confront them. And yes, I have been in that situation before. I went to a Led Zeppelin concert instead of my junior class prom, which probably tells you a lot about me. And when we were there, there was a major riot in Tampa, Florida. You can look it up. They didn't have concert there at Tampa Stadium, the old one, for like a decade after that. And when I saw that the police officers were coming out, we were right up front of the stage, you know, that's what I used to do. And they were coming out both sides and they were encircling the crowd because the crowd was going over the stage and everything else. I told a young friend of mine that a smaller guy said, grab a hold of my belt. We're getting out of here. And I didn't march toward the police. I just started knocking hippies out the way so I could get out of there, because I knew that if I didn't, I was probably going to get my head smacked, whether I deserved it or not, from one of Tampa Bay's finest. Not condoning that. I simply realized what the situation is. So what I'm saying is, if you see police officers who you know are agitated, I'm not defending them. I'm just saying it's a fact. And they're walking in formation to clear a crowd with riot gear on, and you go up and you try to stop them physically, expect to get your hat handed to you. I'm not condoning it, but it's just reality. That gentleman brought it on himself, period. If you're going to confront police officers, don't be surprised if you don't get smacked down. That's just the way it is, man. I mean, is it right, wrong? I don't know. It's reality. Let's put it that way. A Monmouth University poll released last week found that 76% of Americans, including 71% of white people, called racism and discrimination a big problem in the United States, a 26 percentage point spike since 2015. I don't doubt these numbers. I don't think it necessarily means that they're opposed to police. But here's the thing. If you're watching the news and the only news feed you get, let's just assume you're out somewhere and you don't get any, and the only news feed you get is The Walking Dead. That show, The Walking Dead. That's all you ever see. And that every time you turn on the news, The Walking Dead is playing. Well, I think it's safe to say that you're probably going to assume that Atlanta is taken over by zombies. I mean, if that's all you see. So I'm not surprised at these numbers because the Americans are fed this 24/7 round the clock, right? That's just the way it is. In the poll and others, majorities of Americans said that demonstrators' anger was fully justified. Well, who really is arguing against that? Who has really come out and said, people should just be passive and this shouldn't piss anybody off? As I say, what really upsets me about the whole Floyd thing, obviously the death is atrocious. I mean, I know we have to keep saying that, but in this day and age, you've got to qualify yourself. But my biggest problem is we missed an opportunity. We were all unified behind this. And I actually believe, and this is probably conspiratorial to say, I actually believe the media and the progressive leftists that are working in cahoots on all this couldn't stand that. They couldn't take the possibility that America might actually come together behind this, so they had to throw gas on the fire, especially these activists like Antifa, and trust me, they're all working together to destroy these mostly peaceful protests. It says here, and that police officers were generally more likely to treat black people, according to these polls, unfairly than mistreat white people. That's probably a fact. I'm not sure that it is as prevalent as it once was, but as I've been reminded, I don't walk in the shoes of a black man, and so I'm not going to pretend to speak to that. But I listen to people like Candace Owens and know she's not an Uncle Tom or any of that. I think she is just a strong, opinionated woman who happens to be black. And I do believe, based on what I hear and what I see, and I've talked about this in depth last week, check out our podcast, in many ways I showed you before, that race relations in America have improved tremendously. Are they where we need to be? No, they're quite frankly not. But I don't think there's any legislation, as I say, that is going to change that. You cannot, and I keep repeating this, but I think we need to understand this, you cannot, nor will you ever be able to legislate what is in a person's heart. You just can't do it. Only time can do that, and a willingness to change. God can do it, but man, I don't think so. Officials at the White House said that Mr. Trump wants to focus on a law and order message, both because he thinks it's best political option and because it is instinctive. It is his instinctive default setting on matters involving the police. Could it be, and I'm just going to throw this out there for speculation, could it be that President Trump is for law and order because it's the right place to be? Could it just be that he actually believes that? Does it have to be a totally political tactic? I'm not denying that there are politics involved in all of this and discussion groups, even with Trump people. But I believe President Trump is naturally, like it says, instinctive default setting on matters involving the police. I think that probably is true. But listen to this next paragraph. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. The New York Times, their editorial director had to resign and all that kind of stuff because they let Tom Cotton present an alternative point of view, and they just cannot have that in the New York Times. But the New York Times, this is a news piece, supposedly what they're saying here, not an opinion piece. Listen to this paragraph. Mr. Trump has long sought to divide people by race going back to the days when he took out a full page. So he's long sought. Is that fact or opinion? Days when he took out a full-page ads calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, a group of Latino and African American teenagers later exonerated in a sensational rape case. I actually agree that President Trump, then Citizen Trump, was probably not his finest hour. He probably went over the top with it. The only thing I will say is he thought they were guilty. But feelings aren't facts, as I said, and they don't, and that applies to the president, then Citizen Trump as well. The court systems need to determine guilt or innocent, not the mob, not a billionaire, not even the president of the United States. They can pardon people, but they don't determine guilt or innocence. But what I have a problem with is I talked about Al Sharpton earlier, where he was giving the eulogy for Mr. Floyd up in Minnesota last week. But Al Sharpton, whenever they talk, like President Trump, they bring up this case where he was not directly involved and it did nothing illegal at all in that rape case where he put out his opinion and he probably should have kept his mouth shut. I would agree with that to a certain extent. But Al Sharpton, do you remember the Tawana Brawley case? Tawana Brawley, I hope I'm saying that. Some of these names are hard for me. She accused a group of white men of attacking her, kidnapping her, raping her, wrapping her up in like a plastic bag full of feces. It was just horrendous, man. This was in the late 1980s. And Al Sharpton came out and defended her even, and this was proven, he even had to admit to it, that he knew she was lying. And later on, it was proved without a doubt that this woman fabricated the entire story. And they had some riots and stuff behind that. But Al Sharpton came out and pushed this narrative forward and kind of represented her in a public way, kind of got his name on the national scene there behind a case that he knew for a fact was a lie. And yet he's exalted. I just, talk about it. There, I tell you all the time, there is no double standard because President Trump is held to a standard. Al Sharpton, what standard is he held to? So there's only one standard. And conservatives and Trump supporters and the 15% of that Biden said are just bad people, we're held to a standard. Al Sharpton, what standard? He gets promoted. It's just crazy. Republicans privately said they saw the cry for defunding as a political gift, talking about defunding the police, that will alienate middle-of-the-road voters and energize the president's base. Well, let me tell you, the president's base is already energized, and they hate you for it right now. There's one person that the mainstream media, the progressive, the swamp fears more than Donald Trump, hates more than Donald Trump, and that is you, the American people that support Donald Trump. The 15% of y'all that are just bad, those dregs, they call us everything but a child of God, right? They hate you more than anything because they've tried everything in the world to knock you off the breath. I got a meme I want to show right now that basically lists all the different things they've tried, and the only one left right now might be an alien invasion, man. Maybe if the actual Martians come, and they want to destroy us, and they're, anti-Trump, and they're wearing like Trump hats to destroy us, maybe that would work, but everything else doesn't seem to be. Attorney General William P. Barr, in an interview with Fox News on Monday, this part right here, and I haven't addressed this, but I'm going to right now, this just shows you how much Trump derangement syndrome, we talked about that yesterday, go check out our podcast, how real it truly is. Attorney General William P. Barr, in an interview with Fox News on Monday, said that the demonstrations were so bad at the end of May that the Secret Service recommended that President Trump go to his bunker for safety. Mr. Barr said things were so bad that the Secret Service recommended the president go down to the bunker. We can't have that in our country, and I'm going to talk about that specifically in a moment. But the one thing I want to address real quickly, because I tuned in like Morning Joe this morning. So I watch programs and shows like that as a public service, so you don't have to. But they did about a 10-minute segment, which is really long for cable news, on President Trump saying that he went down in the bunker just to kind of check it out, and the Secret Service, and now William Barr coming out saying the Secret Service took him down there. To me, that's a non-story. Maybe I'm just biased. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to check my bias. It's a non-story. It doesn't matter why the president went down there or who ordered him down there or whether he was checking it out. Both could be true at the same time because the Secret Service has no authority to order the president to do anything. They can tell him this is what he wants to do, but if he says, no, I'm not doing it, they can't do anything about it. So President Trump could have said, well, I'll go down there and check it out in his mind, and the Secret Service could have been doing it for his protection. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. That story with everything that's going on right now is completely irrelevant. But once again, the president's lying. Oh, my God, man. It's just Trump derangement syndrome. It's a non-story. But getting back to what Barr said, I want to read it one more time because I do want to make some points on specifically what he said. He said, things were so bad that the Secret Service recommended the president go down to the bunker. We can't have that in our country. And I agree with him, but here, sir, I would just tell you, we can't have it, but we do. We do have it. And so we have to decide as an American people, what kind of country do we want? Because let me tell you, if you want some kind of law, you can hate President Trump all you want. But if you want law and order and you want some semblance of the United States of America under the U.S. Constitution to survive, well, then you pretty much have no choice but to vote for Donald Trump. Because Joe Biden, even if he means it, that not, he is opposed to defunding the police, do you really believe that Joe Biden, who's been up there for 50 years, who now is essentially senile, can't even make a clear sentence, couldn't even get a driver's license in my state, I'd be willing to bet money on that, that he can stand up against all these forces? There's two reasons that people are for Biden, basically. One is they hate Trump. That's the main reason. And secondly, because they know they can manipulate this dude any way they want to. Give him a cookie and he'll go that way, or he might not even get to serve very long. I'm not wishing that. But Biden can't stand up to these socialists and communists. So understand that. If you're supporting Joe Biden, you're supporting the socialist communist takeover of the United States of America. Is that a fact? I think it is. It is my opinionated fact, nonetheless, but I do believe that is true. All right, we're going to move on to this Democratic bill, and you're probably wondering where I'm going with this. I promise to reveal it right now. The Democrats took action yesterday, or in the process of taking action, that if passed in its current form, will destroy every police department in the United States of America, and maybe even law enforcement groups beyond police departments. And here's why. Let me read the headline first. Democrats' police reform bill would ban chokeholds, make civil suits against police officers easier. That second point is what we're going to get to. This is from the LA Times. House Democrats on Monday unveiled a legislative blueprint for reforming police policies responding to the nationwide protests calling for change after the death of George Floyd. As I say, I still am waiting for what could have prevented it. This is the part I want to get to, and this is a long article. We're not going to do much of it, but you really need to understand this because this one thing is the key to what I'm telling you, destroying the police department. A bill led by Congressional Black Caucus Chairman Karen Bass and Senators Kamala Harris of California includes reforms making it easier to sue police officers for misconduct in civil court and to prosecute them for criminal behavior. That sounds great, right? If they're liable, they should be, right? And I'm not on theory opposed to it, but here's the problem. There's something called qualified, some people call it assumed immunity. And here's the deal. I'm going to read you the legal definition and I'm going to explain it in more layman's terms. Legal doctrine in the United States, federal law, which shields government officials from being held personally liable for discretionary actions performed within their official capacity unless their actions violate clearly established federal law. So what this means is, and we'll be specific to police officers, but it applies to firefighters, it applies to mayors and members of Congress, elected officials. Basically, a police officer is assumed immune from prosecution in civil court for this reason. You can sue the departments because they're responsible for the people under them, but not the police officer. You may say, well, that doesn't make sense. It does in this sense. If a police officer can be directly and easier, as they're talking about here, sued in civil court, there will be no police departments, because no human being in their right mind would become a police officer knowing that they are liable for every action they took. They could not do their job. They would literally, because they keep in mind that they have to pay, in this case, not now, because in the current law, the department would pay, and in some cases the unions and stuff like that. But the police officers, if this passed, would be responsible for their own legal bills because they're being personally sued. So they would be sued every single day. Police officers make what, between 30 and 50 grand a year, basically? How could they possibly afford the legal bill, let alone the insurance for liability of that personally, if they were personally assumed that they didn't have this immunity? The same thing with elected officials. Notice that these senators and these congressmen, women and Pelosi and all, they're not proposing that it do away with their qualified immunity, that you could sue the Speaker of the House. Can you imagine trying Nancy Pelosi, if you out there that hate her as much as some of y'all do could actually sue her personally? She couldn't perform her duty in any single way. She'd be too busy responding to millions, literally, of lawsuits. So I'm telling you, don't get lost in I hope I'm explaining this correctly to you. I know I'm explaining it correctly. I hope I'm making sense with it, because they're going to make this sound like it's no big deal. It is the meat of this thing. If this passes, just like the mail-in balloting, trying to compare all mail-in to absentee, they confuse the issue. It sounds on paper like it's reasonable that police officers should be held accountable for what they're doing in court, and they should be, but there's got to be a process that gives them this qualified immunity, or I'm telling you, you won't have any police departments to defund, because no one, and we're in danger of this anyway right now, because I don't know why anybody would want to be a police officer right now. I respect them. Thank God there are. But would you? I don't know. I've said this before, but if I say it, it bears repeating. If I had a son or daughter came to me right now and said, hey, I've decided I want to be a police officer, first, and my first thing would be, it'd be a lot of pride and joy in that, because that would be serving your country. But there's a part of me, I don't know if I would say it to him or not. I probably would. That would say, I don't know if that's the best decision right now. Think about it. And I would give him some things. And that scares me that I even have to contemplate that, because I know that conversation is going to go on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times across the country. And if you add into it that you're going to be sued every single day, tens and thousands and hundreds and thousands of times, then the police department is over. Now, some of you may want that. It doesn't make any sense to me. All right, let me check my time. I've got a few more minutes here. I want to get this other thing here. There's another part of it that really troubles me. And it sounds good as well, but the reality is not quite that's what you might think. It said it would also, this bill the Democrats are pushing, also prohibit the use of chokeholds. I'm not in disagreement. Certain no-knock warrants, that means basically that they have to tell you they're coming in. I fluctuate a little bit with that. But here's the part, and give the Justice Department Civil Rights Division subpoena power to investigate local police departments. That sounds good, but let me tell you, that is a bad idea. You don't want the running of your police department taken over by the federal government. Name me one thing that the federal government does better, really, than your local government would do. I mean, they've made a mess of our schools, right? But the bill also mandates the use of body cameras and bans transfer of certain military equipment. I'm all for body cameras and cameras out there. I actually think that they'll work in defense of the police in most cases, because I think if we had more of them, we would actually see what these police officers are up against. And as far as the militarization of the police department, I need to speak on that just a moment. I have mixed feelings about that as well. I have talked about in the past that there's a difference between a military and a civilian police force. And I do think that there has been a blending of that, and I'm not really in favor of that. Do I think that policemen and police officers need heavier equipment? Yeah. I mean, keep in mind that they're literally blowing up right now as we speak ATMs with dynamite during these riots and all. So, I'm not sure that the police officers don't need more protection. One quick thing, and then we're going to cover this last story and we'll be done. It says here, this Bass said, she's one of the senators pushing this. She said of Floyd's death in police custody, never again should we be subjected to the witnessing what we saw in the streets of Minneapolis. And I agree with her 100%. My only question would be, do you ever say this about what's happening on a daily, nightly basis in Chicago, where we've had scores of people killed and injured in Chicago, and mostly black on black crime, just since the Floyd death? They never mention that. If black lives truly matter everywhere but in Chicago, apparently, man, and the Congress took a knee yesterday. I don't know if you saw this picture. And to me, you talk about a photo op. I mean, this is a photo op if there ever was one. All right, we're gonna. I think they're gonna name this bill though because after Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, the Booker and Hooker bill. But that my sources could be wrong. All right, I wanted to say quickly because we only got about a minute or two left about great news. The Trump rallies appear to be back. This is a Reuters story. It's all over. Politico's got an article as well. Trump campaign rallies to start up again in the next 2 weeks. So they've announced that starting in a couple of weeks, have not announced the locations yet or any of that. They're still trying to figure out the social distancing and what places would allow them to have the maximum impact and what should a rally look like. But the president is determined to bring the rallies back. I'm excited about that. I hope to attend and cover some in our area. I'll tell you this, America's Voice News is the best place possible, and we're on that network, America's Voice News. You can download a free app, Apple, Android app. You can do Roku, Fire Stick, Apple TV. We're on channel 219, Dish Network, and the Pluto channel. But if you want to see all things Trump rally, from the before it starts to the rally to the aftermath, the best place to possibly do that is America's Voice News. So put that in your calendar for when the Trump rallies start. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show today as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it and share it with others. Check out our YouTube channel, John Martin Talks, spell it out. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. Let's all pray for our nation. And I'm going to keep you posted about this thing because I want to say this one more time. Keep in mind this qualified immunity. It is something that we cannot let pass. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.